So, will Gen Z ever own a home? It's the question that kicks off 1,000 arguments. And you've probably heard the go-to advice from older generations, right? It usually sounds something like, just work harder. But what if the entire game has changed? What if working harder just isn't the answer anymore? Let's really get into it.
You know, you hear this kind of thing all the time. It's perfectly summed up in this story from a Reddit user talking about his dad, a quintessential baby boomer. His dad worked his whole life and was absolutely convinced that if young people were struggling, well, they just weren't putting in the elbow grease. And he held on to that belief really, really tightly, right up until the moment he couldn't anymore.
All right, so here's how we're gonna break this down. We're gonna start with that father's big reality check. Then we'll dive into the cold, hard numbers, then versus now. We'll look at what this all means for Gen Z's dream of owning a home, really pick apart that work harder argument, and then wrap things up with the big one, the great wealth divide.
Okay, so let's get back to that story. The son tells his dad how much their mortgage is, and his dad just about loses it. He's convinced they're living way beyond their means. And the son's response? It was simple and kind of brilliant. He just said, "Okay, Dad, you go find us something cheaper."
And this is where the two worlds just collide. See, when the father bought his first place back in the 80s, the house cost just a little over 2 times his household income. Totally manageable. But when he went online to look for his son, after just a few hours, he came back completely stunned. The most affordable option he could find required a mortgage that was nearly 6 times his son's household income. In that single moment, he realized this isn't just a different game, it's a whole different sport.
And look, that father's shocking discovery? It's not just some isolated family drama. His personal wake-up call is backed up by some seriously hard-hitting economic data from across the country.
Get this, according to a Bankrate study, to afford a typical home in the US today, your household needs to bring in nearly $117,000 a year. Let that sink in for a second. For millions of people, especially young people just getting their start, that number isn't just a high bar. It feels like it's in a different galaxy. But here's the truly staggering part, how fast this all happened. I mean, think back to January 2020. It feels like yesterday, right? Back then, the income you needed was around 78 grand. That means the price of admission to homeownership has jumped almost 50% in just 5 years. And let's be real, wages haven't come anywhere close to keeping up with that.
And if you're thinking, oh, that's just a California or New York problem, you need to think again. In 2020, only 6 states required a 6-figure income to buy a typical home. Today, that number has ballooned to 30 states. This isn't a coastal crisis anymore, it's an everywhere crisis.
So we've seen the numbers, and they're pretty grim. But behind all those dollar signs and charts, there's a massive psychological weight being carried by an entire generation. So what is the actual human cost of this housing market for Gen Z?
Well, a report from Clever Offers makes it painfully clear, and it's no surprise, it's all about the money. The single biggest hurdle, nearly half of Gen Z says homes are just flat out too expensive. And right on its heels, you have the double whammy of trying to save for a down payment while also battling cripplingly high interest rates. It's a financial triple threat that makes the dream feel almost completely out of reach.
And the level of despair here, it's hard to even wrap your head around. In fact, that same report found that more than 1 in 5 Gen Zers believe a third world war is more likely to happen in the next 5 years than them buying a house. I mean, just pause on that. When global conflict feels more realistic than getting a mortgage, you know you're dealing with more than just financial stress. That's a deep, deep pessimism about what the future holds.
This desperation is pushing people to consider some truly shocking compromises. When asked what they'd be willing to put up with to own a home, huge percentages of Gen Z said they would knowingly buy a place with, get this, asbestos, major foundation issues, pests like cockroaches and mice, termites, even mold. The classic dream of a charming starter home is being replaced by a grim willingness to accept a hazardous one, just for a chance to get on the property ladder.
Which, of course, brings us right back to where we started, that common piece of advice. Just work harder. It sounds so simple, right? But let's actually put that logic under the microscope and see if it really works as a solution for everyone.
So at its core, the work harder argument frames this whole housing crisis as an individual problem, not a systemic one. It basically suggests that if you can't afford a home, the failure is yours and yours alone. But what happens when you try to apply that logic not just to one person, but to all of society?
Well, as one analysis pointed out, the whole idea kind of collapses on itself. First, you have the reality of corporate structures. They're pyramids, right? There are only a few high-paying spots at the top. We can't all be the CEO. Second, society needs all kinds of jobs to function. We can't all be doctors or lawyers. We need teachers and plumbers and cashiers. And finally, here's the real kicker. Let's pretend everyone did magically start making more money. All that new cash would just flood the housing market, driving prices up even more for everybody. It becomes a self-defeating prophecy.
This all leads us to a final and honestly a critical question. What are the long-term consequences for society when an entire generation is effectively locked out of the primary way people have always built wealth?
For decades, owning a home hasn't just been about having a place to live. It's been the main engine for middle-class families to build equity, to create some stability, and to pass down wealth to their kids. It's a fundamental piece of the American economic story.
Now let's add another huge layer to this, what experts are calling the Great Wealth Transfer. We're talking about trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars in assets, most of it held in real estate that will be passed down from the boomer generation to their heirs. This is creating a massive divide. Those whose parents own homes are set to inherit that wealth, while everyone else falls even further behind, potentially locking in economic inequality for generations to come. So we're left with this massive question. If homeownership, the cornerstone of building wealth for generations, is becoming an impossible dream for millions of young people, what does that do to the promise of upward mobility? What is the future of the American dream? And that's a question that goes so far beyond interest rates and down payments. It gets to the very heart of the economic future that we're all building right now.